right. Well, this, let's see here. So good evening, Andy and Larry. Would you set this up real quick before I do this? Or is it set up here in the script?
It's set up. You had submitted it
Okay.
to me from the person, and I contacted the person, yes.
Gotcha. Okay. So good evening, Andy and Larry. I know I was speaking to the person. I just wasn't sure if it was all the way set up. I spoke with Andy on Narsal Connections. Side note, make sure you go over to Narsal and go find Narsal Connections. It's a social media platform very friendly to PFRs over on the Narsal Connections group. And he suggested that I speak to Larry. I am a criminal defense attorney. My husband is a PFR on federal lifetime supervision. He is currently residing at the federal halfway house here in Vegas, pending his revocation hearing. His PO is alleging 7 violations, and his revocation hearing is Tuesday, and this is Tuesday a couple days ago, June 4th. Andy suggested that Larry may be able to assist with legal arguments, etc. Now, not acting as an attorney, but acting as a strategy partner, right?
Right.
And so I understand that you did contact her, and you had a brief conversation, correct?
2 hours.
That's brief for you.
Indeed.
What happened when you talked to her?
Well, I did indeed contact her, and she is amazing, for sure. She's worked tirelessly on this case, and I'm disappointed that we weren't able to do more for the situation.
Did she say 7 violations?
Yes, she did. And I do not recall all 7, but most of them seemed rather weak. The strongest of the alleged violations is that he had accessed some naughty adult pictures on Instagram, and they offered for him to admit all 7 violations and argue for credit time served already in the halfway house pending the resolution at the PV hearing. So as a condition for his release on the PV, he was placed in a halfway house and was no longer allowed to live with her. And in my opinion, she properly advised her husband to reject that offer. There was no reason to admit to all 7 violations. One of the alleged violations was that he was living at an address that was too close to a park. And the problem is that address had been approved by the previous probation officer.
And let me ask you, though, about something like that. If do you get grandfathered because the previous one said okay and now this one says no? Do you have any grounds to stand on with something like that?
In my opinion, he probably would have, but the probation service notoriously changes the story. And their story was that he was given conditional permission provided that he didn't violate a single condition of probation, of supervised release, you should say. And they're saying that therefore that conditional permission was being withdrawn.
And you mentioned Instagram pictures. Now, I'm not really like a social media person, but it's really hard, at least my understanding from everything that I've listened to, tech podcasts all over the place. Like, you can't find nudity these places. So how did they catch him for having nudity on Instagram?
Well, I thought the same thing because I've been on Instagram, but unfortunately, they stretched the definition a bit. They claimed that on Instagram, the pictures of contained certain body parts that were blurred, but you could still make out it was the whatever and the whatever because it wasn't completely blurred. And therefore, it meets the definition of pornography because the statute, 18 United States Code 2256, subsection 2, states that he specifically cannot view or possess images of, and then there's the list of everything in that statute, 18 U.S.C. 2256. Chance, do you want to give those things that you cannot?
Are you embarrassed, Larry? Okay, I'll do it.
I just saw a bus coming, and he just decided to kick you into the street.
I have no problem. I will say this, okay? Okay. In sub A, except as provided in subparagraph B, sexually explicit conduct means actual or simulated sexual intercourse, including genital to genital, oral to genital, anal to genital, oral to anal, whether between persons of the same or opposite sex, bestiality, masturbation, sadistic or masochistic abuse, or lascivious exhibition of the anus, genitals, or public area of any person. How's that?
Well,
What is a public area of a person? Is this like you can go to Walmart and find the public area of a person?
Nah.
Never mind. Sorry. There's no L in there. Never mind. Sorry. That's totally my bad.
Well,
Did I pass the audition?
You did
yes.
very well.
Okay.
What confuses me about this statute, this 18 U.S.C. 2256, is this appears to be what's intended to prevent the production of child pornography. And I don't know how this becomes a condition of your supervision. Perhaps it's in the behavioral contract, which we're going to get to a little bit later. But this seems to be quite a stretch if you're saying that there was blurred out images where you could have, if you studied it strongly enough, you could imagine what was underneath the blurry part because it wasn't completely blurred out. But yet it was an adult. And this statute is designed to protect children and minors. I don't understand how this was allowed to stand. But we're going to have her on it at some point, and we'll hopefully get more into this.
That seems super weird. Yeah. So, do you think it'll be next week, or because otherwise it'll be like after the conference, and then who knows what's happening after that?
I don't know if she was having to decompress after the 3-day hearing. And I told her in my 22 years of unauthorized practice of law, we've never been allowed 3 days on a probation violation to put forth an evidentiary hearing, to put on an evidentiary hearing. And I talked to Chance, and he said, nope, happens all the time. But I've never been in one where it went on for 3 days. But he was sentenced to 3 months in jail, followed by 3 more months in the halfway house. In addition, he's no longer permitted in the house that they jointly own.
This is really bothersome. Like, seriously, because I'm just going to make the assertion that YouTube has a similar content policy to Facebook and Instagram, and I could have that completely wrong. But you can search hard on YouTube to find anything that has any naughty stuff, and you can't find anything naughty. You can find incredibly close to, but not to my knowledge can you find anything where anything is shown.
Well, that was my thing, and I don't think that it's fair. Not only is it not fair, it's not constitutional, in my view, to tell a human being that you cannot have sexual urges. And for them to say that he cannot look at attractive women or guys or whatever he's looking at on Instagram and use those photos as a stimulation as a part of their behavioral contract, I think that's gone too far. I thought we had talked about this on an episode where there was a case decided that addressed that particular point, that you cannot tell a person not to have any sexual urges and not to look at anything stimulating. Neither of us were able to find it in our vast trove of archives, but I could have sworn we've talked. Do you remember a case where we might have talked about, because I thought we had talked about such a case.
I don't recall offhand. I do have a question for either of you two. Someone in chat said, does that mean just seeing a shirtless man playing basketball meets the definition? If that would be the thing that would be, so inclined for you?
Not
It's an
in my
interesting
opinion.
question.
Not in my opinion. No.
Interesting question, though. If a shirtless man, I mean, there are nipples on males as far as I know, right?
I've heard so.
They may not produce the same outcome, but they're there. So what if the probation service takes the position that that is nudity or provocative?
Right. Yep.
I mean, this is a slippery slope that has no end to it. And to think a federal judge spent the better part of 3 days, was not the complete 3 days, but they were in hearing for 3 days, dealing with Instagram pictures, with all the so-called bad crimes that are going on out there, for a person who's happily married and hopefully being a productive citizen, that now we're throwing him back in the clink to spend money on him is just mind-boggling.
That is mind-boggling.
Well-
If you're going to invite Anya on, I have a parallel case I've just handled in federal court. Very similar. I don't really know the facts of this, but it's very similar. I'd like to be able to do some cross comparisons when she does come on.
Well, if we can't get her this coming week, we will get her. But she said that she was somewhat devastated by the outcome, and I can understand that, because you work so hard to try to reintegrate, and all of a sudden this stuff comes along and it's all taken away, and you got a 6-month setback, plus you got to sell the house. And it's a good time to sell, but it's not such a good time to buy.
One other point that just got brought up is, and sentencing him to banishment from his home with his wife. WTF is that? And I mean, I had something in my head I wanted to bring up after that, but isn't that pretty harsh just for like a PV violation?
Well, I don't think it's all that harsh per se for a probation violation, but you look at the totality of this circumstance. The guy's masturbating to scantily clad women. That's a healthy thing to do.
You would think if he's releasing the demons, then he would not be out preying on whatever they're afraid of him preying upon.
You would think so, but it's an example of our over-resourced law enforcement apparatus. If they didn't,
there you go again, defunding the police.
If the probation service didn't have the ability to bring such cases because they had heavier case loads that they had to monitor, we wouldn't be facing this. But anytime you start talking about trying to reduce the amount of resources that the law enforcement regime has, the conservatives go ballistic. Now, I'm hoping that this thing with Trump, if they're intellectually honest, they will start to say, well, maybe those pointy heads have a point, because all the effort's been put into convicting him is only because they have the resources to do it. Not only because, but partly because of that. I mean, they've got cases going from coast to coast. And if you don't give them the resources, they'll have to make difficult choices. And this is just nonsensical in my view, that we're spending this kind of money on Instagram pictures. Really?
Yeah, I don't get it really at all. All right, moving along then.
Yes, well, amazingly, there won't be anybody on the conservative side of the aisle that will criticize this type of waste of resources. You won't hear anything about that, and that's the sad thing about it, because we need to be dealing with the systemic problem that needs to be fixed rather than making it a personal thing about one individual. The system is overkill across the board.
Yeah,
Very well. Moving along.
I would say splitting
go ahead,
hairs.
Terrence, I'm sorry.
I'd say splitting hairs in this case, but I neglect to use that analogy. Really. Let's move on.
You've been listening to FYP.